Good afternoon and welcome to everybody. This is the third session in a series of sessions today that have been focusing on access to energy for all beyond 2012. So there's been 3 workshops. There's been one on feed-in tariffs, and there's been one on pro-poor low-carbon energy pathways, and another one on sustainable energy for all and innovative delivery models. So the people that you have beside me are people who've been in those sessions today and have come to talk more about energy and to give their own personal views as well as giving us some feedback from those sessions. So let me introduce the panel. We have Sheila Oparaocha, who is, I think, Program Manager at the International Network on Gender and Sustainable Energy, called ENERGIA, from the Netherlands. We have Stefan Schurig, who's the Director of Climate Energy at the World Future Council in Germany. We have Pressend, who is a socio-political analyst and coordinator of the Economic Justice Network in South Africa. And last but by no means least, we have Fabby Tumiwa, who's the Director of the Institute of Essential Services Reform. So welcome, panelists. We're going to start with a scene setter from Stefan, who will give us something, I think, around the focus that we're looking at today, which is sustainable energy for all. And then we'll have each of the panel talk for about 5 minutes on one of the first questions we're going to talk about, and that is what are some of the key principles and processes. After that, I'm going to ask the panel to discuss some of the other themes that are emerging from this issue, and then we'll open it to the floor. We're trying to keep to time today, not just because we think it's important here for networking and refreshment, but also we are live streaming this event. And if we don't keep to time, our colleagues across the globe leave the room because they go and make a cup of tea or go shopping because we're not present. So hopefully we've got started in good time. Stefan.
Yeah, thanks very much for the brief introduction. And for giving the chance to sort of set the scene. I'm personally convinced of the fact that we are discussing one of the most, if not the most important topic for the next decades to be solved, meaning how do we produce energy, meaning how do we cook in the future, especially in developing countries, and how do we make sure that this is sustainable. So sustainable energy for all clearly is one of the key subjects that we are faced with. But when you carefully read the program, you might have wondered why we sort of framed our workshop today slightly different. We said renewable energy for all. And there you're already jumping into the subject, whether sustainable energy for all is renewable energy for all, or whether this is a consensus or not. I clearly think that sustainable energy for all can only mean renewable energy for all. But the international community has, and that's the good news, has acknowledged that topic of energy needs and has acknowledged the fact that 1.3 billion people still have no access at all to energy, electricity, and having a very unsustainable way of using biomass for cooking. So that's the good news. The bad news is that the main initiative that came out of this acknowledgement, the Sustainable Energy for All initiative from the United Nations, still has, let's say, room for improvement. I think it has very good targets in terms of the 3 key targets for the year 2030, doubling the amount of renewable energy, doubling the energy efficiency, and creating universal access to energy. But when you look into the details of this initiative, you wonder why this initiative is called, for example, a multi-stakeholder forum, when you see that very, very few civil society organizations are involved. That's probably not sort of a reflection of what civil society really has to say to that. Also, when it comes to the renewable energy in particular, what wording you find is that it's about large renewable energy uptake. And that can be read as a massive push for renewable in general, but it can be also mean that people are looking into large solution, meaning centralized solutions. And there you are again coming across another subject before I stop here, which is also sort of the key subject that we circled around in our workshop, which is what kind of energy market will we have in the future? And that in particular refers to the fact that in the industrialized nations we have to basically replace a monopolistic energy production sector with decentralized energy production. Some countries have matured in that, and the second challenge is how to make sure that we decentralize, or that we create energy access via decentralization. And therefore we have some good examples and some good suggestions, but I will come to that when I report back from our workshop.
Thank you very much. Are we going to do a round of applause, or are we not going to worry about that? Thank you. So I'm now going to ask the panelists to answer a question. It's the first of 3 key questions that we have. And it's, what do they think are the key principles and processes that would really lead to the success of energy access for the poorest? So I want to hear from the panelists for 5 minutes each on what do they think those principles are. And then we'll go and talk about some of the, or dig deeper into some of the issues behind that. So I'd like to start with Sheila, if that's okay.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. If I think of the principles which you asked first, I would say equitable access is important. We talk about universal access, but I think equitable access is extremely important, and equitable access both to men and women, but also to rich and poor in urban and rural areas. I think another key principle is looking at participatory processes. So in terms of policy making and planning, participation of different stakeholders is really important. So from our perspective, that would be very important. In terms of moving forward, I just would like to, I know we talked about renewable energy, but when you really look, for us, we are quite pleased that Sustainable Energy for All has an energy neutral agenda. Because what's most important, particularly when you're looking at energy from a women's perspective and from a pro-poor perspective, that is what you can afford and what's available. Cooking energy is very important. When you prioritize energy needs for both men and women in developing countries, cooking energy is extremely important. So focus on cooking energy is very important. And cooking energy through electricity and also through some of the renewable energies is very expensive. Cooking energy through fuels, starting with biofuels, but certainly you want to try and increase that, is very important, not just for household use, but also for productive use. We have found that, in fact, in small-scale enterprises, which are really providing energy access for the base of the pyramid, are very fuel-intensive. So that would be important. And one thing we also find is that, for instance, between 2005 and 2008, the World Bank's portfolio was mainly focused on electricity, not necessarily on biomass or on mechanical power. So having that focus is very important when you're considering poverty and energy issues. Another thing, of course, is financing. And here we're not only talking about large investments, though, of course, given the scale of things, that's important. But it's also trying to encourage and mobilize financing at the small scale level, involving small-scale investments. And here I would support what the previous presenter had said, is that when you look at sustainable energy for all, who is setting the agenda, then we do need to see more women. There are 6 women and 42 men in the high-level group, and that also includes the technical group. But we also need to see more local investors. We need to see more civil society, NGOs working in developing countries as well. So I think that's another one. Just tell me when my 5 minutes is up.
I think you can have a bit more.
Okay. Then I would say, for us, another process would be looking at the full value chain and looking at where particularly women can be involved. So looking from the access of raw materials, and what we find in most programs is that attention is given, at least when you're focusing on women, attention is given to women as beneficiaries. We want to create women's employment, create jobs. We know that access to energy services or creating energy services in countries is a stimulus for jobs in developing countries and also in the developed world. But certainly looking at the full value chain and trying to create and trying to have a gender focus and a focus on women, not only on the demand side, but also on the supply side, is very important.
Okay. Thank you. That's lovely, because we can come back and dig a bit more. So, who would like to go next? I'm looking at Fabby. Fabby, would you like to go next?
Thank you. Working? I think you have to.
If you press the button.
I think you have to turn. Okay, yeah. Thank you. Some of the key principles that also reflect from our discussions. There are various key principles that we think very, very important in terms of delivery, the energy service for the poor. First, I think we realized that policy instrument is very, very, very important. So enabling environment to create policies that support sustainable energy delivery to the communities, in particularly for the poor, is very, very important, because that will stimulate, or it will shape up the other principles as well, that following to these policies and regulatory frameworks, such as the financing model. That's also key. We know that there is a potential of bringing public finance to fund projects in to provide the energy services, but also there is some issues regarding using public finance because of the governance. Subsidies in many developing countries are being misused, and government funds are also being corrupted, and also somehow it's not so effective in terms of developing this type of projects. So there is a gap actually in the financing side that requires also private investment or market mechanisms to fill the gap. But also the question is that once we bring market into this service delivery, the service itself become commodities, and this is, I think, also reflect in our discussions what will be the effective, the most effective one. When we have to deliver the energy services, but for the poor that has a low affordability to pay, and also willingness to pay sometimes also low, but at the same time, when we introduce this private investment or market mechanism into it, that they have to pay in substantive amount or other support, probably from the government, from donors, etc. So it's not easy also to address or to address this issue. The second is that we need flexible financing mechanisms, models that tailored to meet the local context, like the ability to pay. Sometimes people cannot pay one amount of money every month, or individually they could not pay. So what will be the mechanisms that encourage the users the recipients to pay, but in different way. So that's needs a lot of smart thinking how you create these financing models. The third one, I think, regarding the capacities in different levels, in the national levels, in community levels that dealing with the projects, and the ownership about the projects also very important, both in the context of local ownership, national ownerships, and the last one is the creating added value for energy service delivery by stimulate productive end use for the energy. So it's not only provide electricity, provide hot water, provide cooking fuels, but more important is how the communities and the poor can benefit from these kind of services, and that's also challenge, because in many cases, in order to make to generate productive end use activities, you need also support from the government, support from others institutions in terms of building infrastructures, develop access to market, develop capacities of the users to generate or create product that competitively uh, competitively enough so it can be accepted by the market. So I think that's some of the key principles that I can share. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to share our thoughts and ideas. So, well, the first principle was the importance of listening to the poor and ensuring democratic participatory engagement. So often multi-stakeholder forums are dominated by big NGOs and resource NGOs and the private sector, and people affected by policies or decisions aren't really participating in these decisions. A second area is that what was mentioned, that energy access may be a bit narrow, and that the focus should look at energy transition and energy development within ecological and environmental limits, as well as focusing on a project basis for pro-poor sort of energy delivery is also very narrow base, and these projects have a lifeline. They're dependent on external funding, but in a sense it doesn't address a systemic change that is needed. A third principle that is about reframing the policies, and that policies in itself, such as privatization, is a barrier, and the shift towards social goods such as energy or water or health or education to commodities is a huge barrier for access to the poor. So there needs to be a move away from a market-driven approach to energy services. We raise the importance about the role of government and reclaiming energy services as a public good. The state has an important role to play in delivering services, and this doesn't mean that you need to have a centralized state. It could be different levels of government. Local governments have an important role to play. We spoke about the importance of new forms of partnerships. A lot of this focus on the sustainable energy for all is on public-private partnerships, And our colleague here mentioned some of the limitations, and the fact is that it's public-private partnership is focused on market demand and market supply, and poor people are then just left out of the equation because they're not going to be able to afford these services. Sorry, something's happening. Okay. Okay. Oh, okay. So we are proposing new forms of partnerships, public-public partnerships, whether it's forms of cooperatives, community, social partnerships, worker groups, with various public agencies, but different forms of partnerships. The third aspect, I'm sorry, probably at number 4 or 5 now, is around localizing energy service supply. So looking at local supply chains, that it's important because it also creates resilience at the local level. In many cases where there is some sort of developments in renewable energy, a lot of the technology is imported. The importance of build capacity, and around that, the focus is around skills transfer, technology development, and technology sharing. Just to say, I mentioned the fact that, but Rio Principle, I think it's Rio Principle 9, they talk about technology sharing. It was in 1992 quite a key principle, but in 1995 with the World Trade Organization, we had the trade-related intellectual property rights clause, which in fact hinders technology transfer. So we hope that this space or forum can discuss different approaches to technology sharing and technology transfer. So I think that's it from me. Yes.
Yeah, as mentioned in my previous remarks, there was, in this workshop, there was sort of a broad acknowledgement that when discussing access to energy, that this should be provided in various ways, certainly, and not only with relation to electricity, but that this should be provided by renewable energy. So that instead of drilling for oil or for gas and bringing this over long distances with a lot of threats and a lot of problems to the various spots, just empowering people in the remote areas, empowering people in the rural areas to harvest the electricity, to harvest the energy that actually surrounds them. So that was sort of the broad starting point, if you like, for our discussion. And then we looked into ways what actually made the renewable energy uptake possible. And then you clearly come to a policy called Feedin tariffs, that has proved extremely successful in those areas where it has been applied and where it has been designed properly to unleash the renewable energy sector production. Basically, feed-in tariff means that you produce electricity with your appliances and you get a guaranteed payment over a certain period of time back, so that you actually start to invest in renewable energy, that you actually become your own electricity producers. Now, this policy has been mainly developed and mainly applied in the industrialized countries. So one of the key questions now clearly was, how do we apply such a policy that is so effectful and so successful? How do we implement such a policy in the global south? And then we discussed certain key criteria under which this policy should be implemented, because a couple of developing countries have applied the policy, but have again made the mistake to benefit the existing energy market that has not a big interest in really making a big business in renewables, and did not really pay attention on people's rights and on these key criteria, which we have defined as they have to be socially balanced, they have to be people-oriented rather than benefiting energy monopoly. They have to be just, and they have to be equitable in terms of access to the grid where it's needed, and access to technology and access to finance. Now, those of you who are listening carefully might ask themselves, okay, fair enough, industrialized countries may be able to finance such a policy, but how do you finance feed-in tariffs in developing countries? And clearly this has been the center of our discussions, and there one proposal has been introduced, which I also from my organization strongly support, and that's an international fund for feed-in tariff, which is called an internationally global feed-in tariff fund. So then we discussed how this could actually look like, and we also discussed where funding could come from when looking into such an international feed-in tariff fund, and we went through a few examples, but clearly it was stated very precisely that without such a fund, even given the fact that renewable energy is in many areas already more competitive than other types of energy, such an international fund would be needed. And that such an international fund then would be working together with the microfinance institutions or the inclusive finance institutions and with the independent power producer to provide the incentives for those who are then starting to build up the renewable energy technologies in the various areas. One key aspect was that so far when you discussed feed-in tariffs as a policy, everyone thought of the fact that you need access to electricity grid. And here we have been stating very clear that feed-in tariff do not require access to an electricity grid. So you do not have to build a nationwide grid until you come up with such a policy. No way you can calculate, you can account the renewable energy without a grid and remunerate it or give back the payments for it without having access to the electricity grid. So the group actually called for such a global feed-in tariff fund and has elaborated on the various aspects related to this. The final section then also looked into existing initiatives, and there was, correct me if I'm wrong, for those who have been in our workshop, there was an acknowledgement that existing initiatives such as the Sustainable Energy for All initiative does rather go or does rather benefit existing energy markets, monopolized energy markets, than looking in fact in these kind of mechanisms, such something like a global feed-in tariff fund. My last remark is explicitly a personal remark, and we didn't really discuss it, but this is my personal aspect which I like to add to this discussion. As we've heard in the beginning of this panel, when you discuss energy access, you have to bear in mind it's not only about electricity. It's very much about cooking, and I've been working in various developing countries. Electricity is actually not even the major or not even the hot topic. The hot topic is how to ensure health way or a more healthy way and a more sustainable way to prepare your food. Because more than 1 million people every year die because of the impacts of air pollution and indoor fires. So we have to look into into solutions that also address this. And I think there are ways of combining electricity and renewable electricity with the way of cooking. And I think this should be also included in whatever system we come up with in the end. That is sort of something like an international policy fund for renewable energy technologies for the Global South. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. I think that was a really good introduction for us in the room. How many people in the room have been in the other energy sessions today? So we've got a few, but not everybody. So we are talking to a wider group, which is great. Okay, we're now going to ask the panel to dig down a little bit further into some of these issues. And I wanted to go to Michelle first. Because I think one of the things you talked about was that the energy focus is too narrow and that there are broader issues involved. And I thought that might be worth expanding on as we start to reflect on, who are the key stakeholders and what is it going to take? What are the actions? What actions are different stakeholders going to have to take to get sustainable energy for all? So I thought it might be interesting if you could you feel it should be a broader debate, if you could tell us a little bit more about that in light of that sort of reflection.
Thanks. Yeah, I see this focus towards a general shift towards a low carbon society, and electricity is one avenue, and certainly energy generation is the biggest contributor to climate change. But there are also other aspects, and so it means a broader shift in production and consumption patterns, and it would have to be, I guess, using less resources from the wealthy parts of society, mm-hmm. And in a sense, poor people have to consume more, but differently, and so it means changes in the way we produce food. Industrial agriculture contributes significantly. It uses immense amount of energy. It's highly carbon intensive. Biofuel production will be. It is also based on industrial agriculture. In fact, will contribute to greater emissions, and so a shift to more agroecological forms of production. We have to deal with issues around the subsidies in the north so that African countries can actually produce their own food and stop importing. So there are issues around transport as well, so because we are transporting so much goods across the world. So it means, in a sense, that communities and countries that are poor need to become more self-reliant. So there's shift in transport, greater access to public transport, different ways of building homes and communities. And I feel that when we talk about energy for all, it's not just about a poor community having access to a solar geyser or solar. In fact, many poor people want to just switch on the light, or they want to cook food on a stove, and so we have to use this crisis as an opportunity to look at broader shifts that needs to happen towards a low carbon society. So those are some of my views.
Thank you, Sheila. I want to come to you, and I want to ask you, thinking again, what kind of practical commitments, or who are the key stakeholders that need to take action? If we're thinking about who is to set the agenda here, and I think you mentioned agenda setting, and are the right people setting the agenda, and what does that mean for equitable access? I wondered if you could take us a little bit further down that road.
Well, when you're talking about the complexities of energy access issues, but in particular energy issues or gender issues, then agenda setting is not has to be a broad stakeholder involvement. It has to be inclusive, and in that, then we look at not just both men and women being involved in it, but also you're talking about government, civil society, and I would like to say, and I strongly believe also private sector, but private sector not just in terms of, like I said, large-scale investments. I mean, energy access is being provided by the informal sector in developing countries. That's private sector. Poor people pay a lot of money for their subsidies. Go mostly to rich and urban communities. Poor people are paying them. So I think private sector, but private sector looking at the local private sector is very important. So I think they also have to be involved in setting priorities. And then, of course, it needs to be cross-sectorial. And I think one of the key, I should have mentioned in terms of not one of the key principles, one of the key actions is not just to have an energy policy has to be aligned to other strategies and policies within the country. Poverty reduction strategies, I think, are very important and provide the basis for which you can actually link to different types of issues in different sectors. I think gender policies certainly have to be aligned, and energy policy has to be aligned to gender objectives. And in that context, then you start bringing in also actors from different sectors. We have about the health issue. The irony is that although, as we've heard, 1.6 million people, mainly women and children, die of energy, if you go to our countries and look if the public health departments who are responsible, even for primary health care, understand this key issue, they don't. So their WHO is doing a very good job in putting out there, but it's very much at the international level. Part of our discussion today is talking about the national level. So getting the health sector involved. We've talked about agriculture. Agro-processing takes a lot of time and energy of women and supply of energy. But so the agriculture sector would also have to be involved. And so I think having different sectors and having different stakeholders, women, men, governments, private sector, as well as civil society, I think is important.
So this sounds like a key capacity building issue as well.
Yes.
Identifying who needs to know what and how they need to be informed and work together.
Yeah. And it's not only capacity building in terms of technology transfer, that I think that's very important, research and development, but it's capacity building also in just how to understand, in the energy sector, to understand and understand how to deal with poverty and gender issues. What are the tools and what are the instruments available to support stakeholders working in the energy sector to deal with poverty and to deal with gender issues. Now, it's not just about technology, it's also about looking at the development issues and developing capacities to understand those and developing the capacity of institutions to be able to deal with these issues.
Thank you. Stefan, I wonder, we've just heard from Sheila about how much the poorest are contributing to the energy market, and I guess there must be, I'm not an expert here, everybody, which you may find out any second now, but there must be a relationship between what's happening nationally and globally in terms of finance. How are those kinds of patterns or mechanisms going to be changed in order to create really accessible energy for all?
Well, if I had the honor to suggest an advice to the parliamentarians of developing countries in the Global South, I would say do not try to copy the system of Europe or of the United States, but just focus on leapfrogging technologies, because I can tell you it is very difficult to or it's even more difficult to replace a system than building a new system. In Europe, we are having the challenge to overcome the existing energy structure, meaning a monopolized energy market where very few companies govern the energy market and decide to what prices you get the electricity, for example. And that's very, very unsustainable. So with regard to developing countries, I would suggest try to sort of design a system that empowers the people, that decentralizes the energy sector, or basically just takes the energy and harvests the energy where it is. And that means, and that's by nature, a decentralized energy production. Build grids where it's necessary, but leave it and just, leave the communities with mini grids or even with no grids, but provide incentives for them to invest. And I can only second what's been just said. Do not look only on energy questions and how to increase the renewable energy share, but in particularly sort of come from a rather holistic view that also looks into the various aspects of health and social issues. And then I'm sure you will end up with a system or with a political incentive that that pushes the renewable energy development and that democratizes the renewable energy development, because in fact that's the most fastest way to create access and to produce renewable energy in the remote areas.
Thank you. And I have another question for Fabby, I think, which is we talked earlier about one of the important principles was kind of technology transfer and increased knowledge in what technology can offer. I mean, can you take us a little bit further down that road?
Yeah, I think the technology selection is also very important because it will serve what will be the purpose of this access to energy. Because we all, I think, we all agree that providing access to energy is not about providing electricity or cooking, but more importantly, what kind of service that um, will be delivered to the people, to the users, and that's rely on what kind of technologies, because I think this when we talk about the technology option, at least it should consider several factors. First is that it's must suitable with the local resources, with the as Stefan mentioned, it can encourage for decentralized energy system. So generate energy where the resource is available. Second, it should be reliable, and that's not only pick one or two technology, but also we have to consider about the qualities, the reliability of these technologies in order to ensure its sustainability. We have seen now in the market various technology. For instance, you have photovoltaic panels from from different manufacturers. You have from Germany, you have from China, even from China you have grade A1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 7. So, and that price is very competitive in the market. The issue here is that yes, the technology available in the market in the very competitive price even, but then how how we select the technology that will serve our purpose and meet our demand as well. So that's a really challenge. The other one is that it should encourage maybe I can say that energy independence. I mean that the locals, when we talk about energy service for the poor, then the local people should be able also to operate and maintain these systems without depending so much from the others. I think that's well in many ways is not always successful, because many of the communities, at least from the experience that I had in Indonesia, many of the community managed project also cannot sustain beyond some level. So I mean it needs, but again, the quality and reliability of technology will support that. And I think, and the last point regarding this is that in terms of technology transfers now, I think we depend so much from technology from the West, or now also from China. But how the other developing countries can develop its manufacturing capacity, and that needs to be supported by research. How we can do leapfrogging, not start with the basic research, because it takes 10, 20 years to complete that research, but how in the very short periods these developing countries can able to manufacture a cheap but reliable reliable technology in order to cut the costs for capital investment, because that I think when we discuss about providing energy for 1.5 billion people, electricity, we need billions dollars, and that's and one of the most expensive one is the capital investment. And the question for many developing countries is that how with the limited funding options that we have now, how we can use the fund effectively, and it's related with the cost of the technology. I think that's still the key issues now, even in the climate change negotiation when we discuss about technology transfer. Well, the developed countries still reluctant, but I think we have to find a way how we can stimulate this global efforts in terms of initiate global wide technology transfer for the key particular technologies that can support, let's say, the sustainable energy for all initiative target. And but also we have to consider that in the local level there are already some capacities and needs just little additional support to make the technology that produce locally more efficient and competitive in terms of price.
Thank you. Now, before I open it to the floor, I'm going to ask the panel if they'd like to make any other comments that they feel they haven't been able to make. I know Stefan has got one, so we'll start with him.
Okay. Just I actually just want to second what has been just said, and I just want to take your imagination to a little village in Ghana where I went to 1.5 years ago. So it's called Oparaocha, and Oparaocha has no electricity at all. And we went there to discuss solar, but that's not important. That's not what I want to report here. I questioned myself, what do people in this village need to actually start to build renewable energy? And clearly, the answer is the incentive to make money with it, and it's just been said, the support that it's accessible, that it's an accessible solution, that there is somebody who provides sort of an all-inclusive package for them, from the credit to the appliances to the teaching of how to maintain the facility and how to repair it, and these kind of things. So capacity building and teaching how to maintain the appliances and the credit should come from one and the same institution, which is why I'm not speaking about microfinance institutions, but I rather speak about inclusive financing institutions that provide these all-inclusive packages to the people in the village. Now, the missing link for that is, how does this inclusive financing institution know that they will get back their money that they lent to the independent power producer? And that's what we've been discussing in our workshop, and which I just described. That's the national feed-in tariff policy that provides the incentive, and the national legislation needs international support from such a global feed-in tariff fund. So there is the link.
Yeah, I feel I have real difficulty about this, the role of the sort of independent producer, and I just want to reiterate. I mean, it's a challenge, but governments have an important role to play, and I suppose as civil society we have to put greater pressure on governments to establish the will to prioritize the development of renewable energy. I live in a country where there's lots of coal, and our government has said, we have 200 years of coal, we are going to use this coal. And they are building 2 huge power stations, and other countries will have oil, and they will, despite the fact that we're in a global climate crisis, this is the situation. And so, you know, unless there's, there's some sort of global agreement of a transition, and part of the challenges here is that developing countries are saying, we cannot do this if we don't have the appropriate resources and the technology. And so we're in a catch-22. And while there's this opportunity for countries that already have the competitive advantage, like Europe, that have developed the technologies, and all these independent, greedy power producers waiting for decisions to be made, the poor will not have this access. So we again go back and be limited to this kind of project approach to a village in the community, in some remote African community. But we really have to deal with this broader systemic issues here. I mean, but I think that we have to move the debate to that level.
Sheila or Fabby, do you want to say a last final comment?
Yes, and I'm going to. I will piggyback on the approach that. Okay. For me, the important thing is not the technology. I think there are other developmental issues that are key. And just an example. ENERGIA supports the Norwegian government in gender mainstreaming in its energy programs. We've recently been working in Mozambique, which is one of the key partners for Norway's Energy Development Corporation. Norway and Mozambique have an agreement for rural expanding the grid to rural areas. When we went, it was not the electricity that was the problem. The energy had been brought, but 2% of households in the communities that we visited in Mozambique had actually tapped onto the grid. There was a social fund for poor households to actually that was subsidized to actually access for the connection fee, so that they could access the electricity. This was subsidized by the government, so a subsidy had been provided. There was even installments, so you didn't have to pay the connection fee all at once. The key issue was that the people they were sending out into the community were, okay, Mozambique, they speak Portuguese, but were coming from the urban areas, not speaking the local languages. These were mainly men, they were not talking to women. So the issue of accessing the electricity was not because the electricity was not there. It was not because a subsidy hadn't been provided or it was market. It was really far more complex issues of understanding understanding the constraints and the barriers that the poor have to actually be able to tap into the opportunities that are available. Another example is, for instance, in India, and this was the Indian government had a large improved cook stove program where they were actually providing free of charge cook stoves nationwide to all of India. This was a program that was deemed unsuccessful in 2008, and not because the technology was not there, but because the technology, when the way the technology was brought into the villages was that it was brought mostly to the village household head. There was no explanation given to the users, which are mainly the women. When it came from taking from one area to the other, the promoters and disseminators who were subsidized and paid by the government were men. So the issues are far broader than what technology we have. It's really understanding the multi-dimension and very complex issues of people's opportunities to participate and to I don't want to use the word access, but to access this type of thing. So I hope I've made my point.
Very short point, then we're going to get some questions.
I think in our discussions, there's also issues regarding what will be the best approach in terms of deliver the energy service for the poor. Is this commercial versus non-commercial type of model? I think that's really we need a lot of discussions to that. But I mean, for me, it's more I think important before we come to that, I think we have to consider what will be the best and the most effective in terms of delivery these services. What is the most cost effective, cost efficient, and in what model can really provide the goods, the quality of the quality of the services. I think we have a mixed result here, where in some cases you have like private sectors bring can have more good services but more expensive in terms of cost, and you have public utilities that can deliver a project with a more cost effective, but sometimes it's not really sustainable. But so the different well in terms of model, I think we have to think very creatively what will be the best model based on the local context, local situations, and I think it's not a silver bullet. The answer is we have to find based on the context that we are working on.
Great, thanks very much, everybody. So we've got questions. I see a hand up already, and a hand there, and a hand there. I'm going to take 3 questions at a time. We can start here. This gentleman in the blue shirt. And if you could give your name and your organisation, and if you two could be brief enough so that we get enough questions, that would be appreciated. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Yeah, my name is Sergio Zoransky. I'm with Jansa. I work in a part of Mexico where there's incredible wind. You know, it literally blows even bridges, you know, like road bridges away. And it's indigenous territory, like almost all places in the world that have a fantastic renewable energy resource. It's inhabited by historically disadvantaged communities that were displaced there because nobody wanted to live there. And now suddenly this factor that got them displaced there is a source of important revenue. It's cheaper electricity than nuclear, than coal, than anything else. So because of that, the transition to renewable energy actually can become a very important threat to communities that live in these areas. And here I'm not talking about the small-scale self-supply. I'm talking about the huge projects that are going to shut down, hopefully, the coal power plants and the fossil fuel power plants. So it's a great threat, but at the same time it's a great opportunity, because if the communities can take the lead and develop this resource as a community resource, on the basis of community common ownership. So instead of resulting in an erosion of rights, it results in a strengthening of common rights and a strengthening of the social tissue. Then you have a fantastic opportunity for historical justice as well as development. No? So this has already been proven. You know, this is how wind energy actually developed in Denmark and Germany. It was done by the communities, was driven by the communities, and you had an incredible growth rate because the communities are the best developers. They know best the territory, they know best how to make use of it, and then the projects are seamless. You know, everybody supports them. But in contrast, the situation where I work in Oaxaca is that there's large corporations taking over indigenous land, and there's sabotage, blockades. One person has already been killed in a protest against wind farms. There's more and more violence. You know, it's very serious. So, well, we're working on adapting the community wind energy model to a developing and emerging country context by providing financing, low-cost financing, in order to build large-scale infrastructure. Now, the energy access for those that don't have access to energy is absolutely fundamental, but there is one aspect that is often overlooked when we're talking about renewable energies in the context of the struggle against poverty, which is who is going to do the energy transition in terms of the very large-scale projects. That can be done by the communities as well. And so that's what we're working on. We're actually working together with Siemens as a technology partner. There's someone here from Siemens Sustainability. They're being great in terms of, like, not all partnerships with the private sector have to be bad. In this case, the wind farm will be owned by the community, will be the collective property of 30,000 indigenous people, and it will provide an income stream of about $1.5 to $2 million per year to the community to be collectively governed and managed by a community development trust. So we are actually organizing a discussion and dinner on Monday evening that you are all invited to join if you want. On Monday the 18th, that means the day after tomorrow, right? It's going to be in a fantastic, wonderful house. It's hard to believe, you know. It's a really beautiful place, but it's a bit difficult to get there. So if people are interested in coming, we're going to pick people up from different parts of town, wherever you are, and the idea is to have a discussion on how these ideas of a community-driven transition to renewable energy can be discussed, you know, how this discussion can go into more developing and emerging countries, and what concrete steps can happen to turn this into reality. So I have invitations here. I'm just going to pass around the room. There's versions in English and in Portuguese, and there will be simultaneous translation into Portuguese on the evening.
Okay, thanks. Perhaps we could wait for the invitations till the end, or as we're leaving, there's a table outside as well, if you'd like to put some out there. That would be great. And we've got a gentleman in the middle here.
Hi, my name is Lawrence Galvis. I'm with the Johns Hopkins University School for Advanced International Studies in Washington, D.C. My question is, I think, quite specific to Stefan Schurig's presentation. I was quite struck by what you said about how you think what should be delivered to rural communities is complete packages that include, you know, all aspects of energy access and including capacity building and so on, and everything that goes with that. We're actually working with the Rockefeller Foundation on an idea just like that in India. But one of the things that we've come across is that in terms of financing for such mini or microgrids at a village level, it's very hard to attract financing to just a mini grid, a project at a time. And it might be a lot easier to attract large-scale financing for something like this if you could bundle many projects, many mini-grids into larger portfolios that would attract, that would diversify risk for investors and would thereby attract more private finance as opposed to only, you know, development assistance, essentially, because if you have more, if you have a solid business case, and I think with the technology with the technology being where it is, a solid business case can easily be made for a mini grid, then you shouldn't need development aid to electrify villages. You can make a business case. So my question is, have you put some thought into such an aggregating idea of creating portfolios of projects? And if so, who could do that, or where an aggregator for something like that could sit institutionally? Thank you.
Yes, my name is Daniel Chavez from the Transnational Institute, Amsterdam. I have a question regarding electricity, not about energy in general. Before making the question, I would like to highlight 2 points addressed by Michelle. She said that she was a bit skeptical about independent power providers. I share her skepticism. And she also reminded us that there is another actor about which we haven't talked so much, especially today, that is the government, or the state, to be more precise. And my question has to do with the level of scale, because as TNI, we are part of a global research project that constituted by different universities, think tanks, community organizations from different regions of the world. And one of the conclusions of our research is that when we talk about alternatives, the situation is not the same in Africa, Latin America, or Asia. The meaning of alternative and the needs for different responses are quite different in each one of these regions. And so far, we are talking only about decentralized, micro-scale kind of projects. And I think we are all in favor of that, because we all want locally controlled, community-driven alternatives. But we shouldn't forget that in some countries of the South, we already have a quite high level of coverage of electricity services. And for those countries, we should also be discussing how to change the electricity model, how to change the energy matrix of this country. So my question has to do about what are you thinking about those cases? For instance, in Latin America, you have many countries where the level of coverage is already more than 95%, but you still need some kind of transition to more sustainable kind of generation. So I think we should also be discussing how to reclaim some of those public companies that are still there, that are highly corporatized. For instance, in South Africa, you have ESCOM, in Brazil you have Eletrobras, in Colombia you have EPM, those kind of companies that are public in name but still behave very much as a private corporation and not really investing as they should in sustainable energy.
My name is Nevio from PwC Sustainability. I have two questions. First question is renewable energy technology is ready to support the development of the poorest country in energy? Because energy is not used only for the cooking. Energy is used for the hospital, for services, for water treatment. Are the technology of renewable energy ready for this one? First question. Second question is the alternative energy the only solution for the access to energy in each poorest country in energy? Because we have a lot of country, we have a lot of fossil fuel were export in the Europe. In this country, the efficiency is to use this type of energy to cover the local necessity. I think there is a global approach to renewable energy. In each country, there is a specific strategy for cover access to energy. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask the panelists to reply, and if you could keep it brief. I know it's difficult in these short sessions, but I'd like to take another round of questions after, so if panelists could be brief, that would be good. Stefan, would you like to start with the specific one?
Yeah, thanks for the excellent questions. With regard to the first question that was directly addressed to me, whether there is any experience in bundling projects and helping this to develop the renewable energy sector in the various regions. My experience is that first you need a national policy that provides the incentives for investors, for all stakeholders, to actually operate renewable energy facilities, which is why I'm so much pushing for a national policy that empowers the people to basically harvest the renewable energy. So for me, it's sort of an interim solution. Unless you have such a policy, there could be projects that are bundled and put together in sort of gathering them to a larger project and then operate it easier and make it more efficient. This clearly can be also the case when you have a national policies, and we have this experience in Germany where you have just a community that just runs a wind park of like 12 or 15 wind turbines, each of them 3 megawatts. And the whole community profits from the profits that the wind energy produces. So clearly, you know, there are some solutions, but it shouldn't be an either-or question. You have to have a national policy that provides sort of the investment security for the little investor in the little village in Ghana to run small appliances, as well as for communities running a project or investors that want to do renewables in a bigger scale. I don't know if other questions were straight directed to me. Maybe I just take the question if renewable energy is ready. The answer is it is absolute ready and it can deliver. And I just give you the figure from my own country. Germany has more than 80 million people. And we had a renewable energy share in the year 2000 by 3%, coming mainly from small hydro power plants. Only within 10 years, a 6-page policy pushed the renewable energy share from 3 to more than 20% share. So that means on a Sunday when factories are not operating and when the energy level is low, we are producing mainly 100% the energy the whole country, 80 million people needs. So renewable energy can deliver in industrialized countries. It's not the technology that produces or that sort of transform the energy into electricity, the energy from wind or from solar or from geothermal. It's the grid technology that we are discussing at the moment, and it's the technology to balance the electricity grid, since all the country is basically connected to the grid.
Who'd like to answer the question on community-driven development? I think we had a couple of questions there. Anybody? Michelle, you were mentioned, I think, around the electricity and community models. Would you like to?
Okay, I'm going to link the question, that question or response to the question of scale. So the two things is that many communities in developing countries, they don't have any access and are still dependent on biomass and are burning wood. And in South Africa, 34% of our population do not have access to modern electricity. So there's an opportunity through, I guess, through a different approach, and perhaps we're appropriate, looking at various renewable energy technologies to supply that sort of electricity. On the larger scale is that this has to be looked at in terms of the energy or electricity consumption. And again, I speak from South Africa, is that unfortunately, South Africa, for instance, is still locked in a minerals energy complex. And a large amount of our electricity is used for mining companies who get a subsidy and pay perhaps 0.2% or per kilowatt, and a household is paying sort of, or they're paying 2 cents per kilowatt, and a household is paying 13 cents per kilowatt. And so that has to change. So part of the scale is putting in incentives or changing these incentives for corporations to use energy cheaply. The other aspect is it's going to take a lot from civil society to shift government policy. As I said, in our country, there's a lot of power and interest in mining companies, and it's all connected to electricity. So there's, in fact, no incentive to move to renewable energies because of this mineral energy complex. So thirdly, it's going to be also important for these parastatals to operate on the terms of on a public basis, and so to ensure equity in electricity generation. I just wanted to say the comment on, how do we make a business case, is that I really believe that we, as civil society, have to push for that energy services, electricity is a right. It's a right for all citizens, and we need to therefore set in policies that will impose that right. And governments have, through user pays, cost recoveries, a range of policies through privatization, have made electricity a commodity, and that is in fact what has impact on the poor's access to electricity. So we have to bring back electricity or energy service as a public good.
Well, you want to respond to that? I was going to try and take another couple of questions. What do you think? Quick one. Yeah, go for it.
Well, just in terms of the community development, Yeah, that this in terms of moving forward for Energy for Access for All, this should become not just a sideline or one-off, that this really should become a mainstream approach to providing energy for all. But remember that communities are not homogeneous, that there are also issues in communities, and in our experience within ENERGIA, working with community development projects, particularly in the Philippines, that's really taking the lead in using community development to provide energy access, that we still found issues that as to who is involved in these projects. So taking into consideration what I was saying, the social culture aspects of setting up institutional side to manage community development projects is important, so that everybody, both men and women are involved. In terms of the electricity, I like what you talked about, the matrix, because we do see, the fastest growing economies in the world are now in Africa and in Latin America. Ghana has 72% access to electricity, but what's the electricity matrix? So if your terms of access to electricity is when it comes to the transformer, or if your access to electricity is when it comes to the industry that is there. So I think ensuring that electricity does, so I would actually talk, so we do find that although we have access to communities, it's not everybody who has access, and this is what we're calling the densification. So in countries that really have got high levels of electricity access, looking at who has access in those communities, and trying to ensure that it's not just one point. So is it to households? Is it to small businesses that are getting it? I think those are key issues to our countries that are growing and have good access. Thank you.
Thank you. That was great. I just wanted to try and slip in another question from the audience, but has anyone got a question? Alison.
One thing we've not heard a lot about, and one thing in terms of the Sustainable Energy for All initiative, certainly a number of the NGOs are very concerned about how we monitor the impacts of the Sustainable Energy for All. And currently a lot of the monitoring, particularly by big multilateral banks, what have you, is about how many megawatts of power have gone to the grid. They say it's cheap power going to the grid, rather than saying how many women have a clean cook stove, how many small enterprises are powered, how many clinics have refrigeration, how many women give birth by candlelight or by electric light. So it's actually the delivery model, and I think that's something that we need to work towards, ensuring that the initiatives such like Sustainable Energy will actually have that end, and that we can actually monitor and prove and show it. And actually by monitoring these things, it's driving those who have the funding and have the decision making to actually being accountable to that end.
One last quick question. The gentleman at the front. Thanks.
I'm Thijs de la Cour from the Dutch Association of Local Governments. And I'm curious, I did not hear much about the subsidy for fossil fuels in this discussion. We have a big debate in my country that we've seen that the subsidy of fossil fuels is in the multi-billions only at our national scale. And it's 5 times as high as the subsidy of financing of sustainable energy. At the global scale, if you look at the World Bank and other banks, that's even a far larger divide. So as long as you don't focus also on the financing mechanism, the power behind these kind of investments, this energy for all on the issue of sustainability will, I think, be at a loss.
Thank you. Sheila, would you like to comment on the first question around monitoring?
Well, just to totally and absolutely agree with Alison, that I think it's very important that we monitor impacts, and that the indicators that we use should not just be on numbers, on qualitative indicators, but more on the qualitative, and very much on the what is called demand side. So, for instance, for women, it's you talked about a number of them that are important, but also, for instance, time saved is very important. Income earned is very important. So, just to fully and completely agree with you there.
And even if you look on the demand side, and even if you would only look on the demand side, I think the sustainable energy for all, as it is designed now, will not deliver what they promised. Because I think it is much smarter and even much faster when you empower the people to produce their electricity. And when you read into the concept of the sustainable energy for all concept and who advises it, then you very, very quickly come to the conclusion that this is basically more a representation of, let's say, the old energy sector, the centralized energy sector, rather than what we are discussing here, involving the civil society and actually bring back democracy to the energy sector. So I totally agree that this really needs a reform, the Sustainable Energy for All initiative. The comment from Thijs, I'm glad that you raised that. Fossil fuel subsidies, if you would ask me if I had a wish, coming up with most efficient renewable energy policies or removing all fossil fuel subsidies, guess what I would choose? I would, of course, clearly immediately say remove all fossil fuel subsidies, because then renewables are by nature far more cheaper than the fossil fuel use, and the drilling and the transportation and the impact on the environment also taken into account. So clearly, if you remove all fossil fuels, you can just relax and you can forget what we've been discussing here. But who thinks that we will be removing all fossil fuels within the next 10 years on the global scale? Okay, well, that's nobody. And that's exactly the reason why we are having these discussions here. We need to build up, and that's actually more a strategical question for renewables. We need to build up, if you like, a parallel system that challenges the existing markets, mainly consisting of monopolies and fossil fuel industry. And that's what we've been doing in some countries. That's where we are maturing. We have brought down the prices for renewables already. Just in the last 2.5 years, it halved again the price for photovoltaic. And we're making large progress, which is why let's say the established energy industry is getting very worried at the moment.
Yeah, I just want to say that the sustainable energy for all is, it's indicative of many of the UN programs around corporate capture of the UN. And so I think that for civil society, it's going to be very important to also play a monitoring role and exposing the types of initiatives that are coming out there, because if this goes further, it would be anything but sustainable energy for all. I just wanted to say that the issue about subsidies is really important focus, but we also need to look in investment agreements, particularly in developing countries, because they offer incentives like cheap energy for corporations to operate in their regions. So that's also an important avenue to monitor subsidies and also put pressure on governments to eliminate these distorted fossil fuel subsidies. Thanks.
Yeah, I think for sustainable energy for all initiative, the main challenge is that how to translate that into national policies and planning model. I think that is not easy. And if you learn from the Millennium Development Goals, also it takes some years until, and that's quite easy one. But it takes some years until countries can develop operational plans and integrate that to the poverty reduction strategy program. So I also think that to translate this initiative into the real policies and planning in national level is not that easy. And we have all the discussion regarding finance models of the best model to deliver the energy services also still very relevant. In the context of fossil fuel subsidies, I think there's a differences between fossil fuel subsidy in developed country and developing countries. I think in developed country you talk so much regarding these the subsidy for the fossil fuel producers. But in the developing countries, like my countries, that for the consumers, that's for the, and that's really have the different political this context and highly political. Indonesia is one of the largest country that provide fossil fuel subsidy for the consumer. It's like $20 to $25 billion every year. I mean, and I think if we can reduce that, and even like half of it can be translated into financing renewable energy projects, that we can create billions, we can create millions of watts, I mean, in terms of capacities. Yeah, but it's not easy to cut that and just simply remove and allocate the fund for increasing access of energy.
Thank you very much. Is Pasco here? Pasco, brilliant. We had asked Pasco to sit and listen and then to do a quick roundup. And I wonder, we've come to time, Pasco, but could you in 2 minutes, a challenge, very ambitious, and I mean 2 minutes, but thank you. Could you summarize just very quickly for us what you think have been the key things you've heard? Thank you.
I guess the point of this was to look at the Sustainable Energy for All initiative, Ban Ki-moon's initiative, trying to give universal access, double renewables, double efficiency. And quite a few civil society organisations don't feel it's going far enough, and there are a lot of holes, to say the least. And so I think the point of this panel was in part to pass on some recommendations. So what I've heard in terms of what I would pass on and what I'd like this session to pass on is, I mean, there's a few key areas, and one that keeps coming out is the roles of different actors. And I think one that's been very underplayed by the initiative is the role of governments. And this is what's come out quite strongly here, is that governments have a very strong role to play in this. And it's not just about public-private partnerships, but about public-social partnerships, about governments protecting rights and underpinning those rights, governments setting the right policy framework, but also realising that the governments are the safety net. I mean, we're not going to leave poor people, the market to not deliver for poor people. This is what governments are there for, and we have a social contract. And so there's quite a few different areas in which governments have come out, the important role of them for convening other actors. And so a point touched on that this is about development in a broader sense. It's not just about energy access, and we have to put it into a bigger framework, and governments have to be part of that drive towards seeing what future we want, what vision we want, considering we're living in planetary boundaries as well, the planetary emergency we're facing. Governments have to be part of driving a change towards a far more developed future that is not based on fossil fuels, and I think governments have a key role to play in this. And then obviously the governments at the national level, at the international level. I mean, governments have to be playing a role at the local level and the international level as well. But looking at the local level, the importance of access to finance, the importance of the right technologies, locally appropriate technologies, the importance of the right definition of access. And I think Alison brought this up, and this comes down again to the government ensuring it's the right definition and the international level ensuring it's the right definition. And this comes all the way through. And I think we have to make sure that at the very highest level we have the right principles in place to make sure that at the national level we have the right policies, and at the local level we have the right implementation. And that is ensuring the marginalised groups are included, vulnerable groups, indigenous peoples, women's rights, to ensure that everybody has a say within this initiative at the very highest level, to make sure that at the very lowest level that it's implemented in the right way. I'll wrap it up there.
That was brilliant. Thank you very much to everybody. This has been a really interesting and inspiring session. There's a couple of points I think that Ben wanted me to make. I believe there's a meeting on Monday that Michelle is speaking in about sustainable energy for all. Go to Ben if you need more information. And I think there's also, is it a Sherpa group, Ben, that is contributing to Ban Ki-moon's thinking on this? Great.
Sustainable energy for all from an African perspective. So we hope that some of the messages from here go into that. Okay. And we're also hoping to feed some of these messages into the Sherpa group, and these are the people that themselves feed into Banki and that very high level group.
So it remains to give yourself a big round of applause, and thank you very much.